to celebrate the launch of The Life of Dufu, a book that Forrest Gander calls concerned with mortality, friendship, and regret, the psyche looking back at its life. A few nights ago, I spent some time trying to explain Eliot's work to a friend. To my misfortune. They're essays, but they're historical, but they're narrative, but they're poetic. As Gander points out in his recent review of the book in the LARB, the poetic nature of Weinberger's work serves a function of unifying not only his entire ode, but individual lines and sentences through, as the scholar Haruo Shiran writes of Basho, linking by sense. The Life of Dufu is Weinberger's first poetry collection, drawing from his deep knowledge of Dufu and Chinese literature, but also ultimately functioning as priest's telescope. In presenting Dufu, he presents us Weinberger and presents us to ourselves. Eliot Weinberger's books include Karmic Traces, An Elemental Thing, The Ghosts of Birds, and Angels and Saints. His political writings are collected in What I Heard About Iraq and What Happened Here, Bush Chronicles. The author of a study of Chinese poetry translation, 19 Ways of Looking at Wang Wei. He's a translator of the poetry of Bei Dao, the editor of the New Directions Anthology of Classical Chinese Poetry, and the general editor of the series Calligrams, Writings from and on China. Among his translations of Latin American poetry and prose are the poems of Octavio Paz, Paz's In Light of India, Vincent Huidobro's Altazor, Xavier Villarrutia's Nostalgia for Death, and Jorge Luis Borges' Seven Nights and selected non-fictions. Madeleine Thien, his interlocutor, is the author of 4 books of fiction. Most recently, Do Not Say We Have Nothing, which was shortlisted for the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize for Fiction, and the Folio Prize, and won the Gilder Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for Fiction. Her books have been translated into more than 25 languages, and her essays and stories can be found in The New Yorker, Granta, Brick, The Guardian, Times Literary Supplement, the New York Review of Books, and elsewhere. Since 2018, she has been a professor of English at Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. So this event is being live streamed at Paula Cooper's studio, which you can access after and in perpetuity. Forever, after everything else ends, you'll have this stream forever. And the new book will be for sale. Eliot and Maddie will be available to chat and sign their books after. Thank you.
Okay.
So I just wanted to thank Thomas for the introduction and thank you to everyone for being here.
Oh, wait.
Turn it on. Wait.
I didn't turn that up. Sorry.
I did. I was.
Yeah, if you reach in the back, there's a little clicker thing.
So much for perpetuity.
From now on.
It'll get to be silent. Oh. Oh, okay. If my mic is on or not?
Yes.
It is?
Is it on?
It should be.
Turn it up.
What? Are we okay? No? Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for coming. We're competing tonight with the Paris Review Gala, but that's $1,000 a ticket. So with all the money you're saving, I hope you'll buy a lot of books, especially Maddie's book.
Is it focused on them?
Okay. And then I wanted to say, they asked me who I wanted to talk with for this event, and so I asked Maddie to do it because my spies had told me that example, the main characters are Dufu, Spinoza, and Hannah Arendt.
Ooh.
And so I want to hear about that actually. That sounds more interesting. Okay, so I'm going to read a little bit from the first half of the life of Dufu. And it sort of follows, I mean, we'll talk about what it is more, I guess, later, but I call it a fictional autobiography, drawn from the poetry of Dufu. And I'll read a little bit from the first half, which follows, first of all, his life in Chang'an, which is at the time, now Xi'an, which at the time was the largest city in the world, and certainly the most sophisticated one. And then he becomes a kind of minor official, and he's traveling around as that, and then the war breaks out, the Anli Shan Rebellion, where a third of the population is killed. And he's separated from his family the whole time, and he's kind of wandering around before he finally settles down in his a little hut by the river. They say this is the only tree in the world that has these pears, for these pears have no desire to propagate elsewhere. I thought of the old man who killed his chickens. He had hundreds of chickens, each with its own name. He could call its name, and the chicken would come. I thought of him when all the candidates, including me, failed the exam. On either side of me, people take strong positions and never agree. I have a hard time remembering what anyone says. I thought of the poet Cezanne, who was often told that he was talented but unwise. Just before he was executed, he wrote the poem, Now I Am Ashamed. They say that at the entrance to a house, one can always be hit by a falling roof tile. These days I'm already sad before I get drunk, and drunk I have no place to go. I tug at my robe, but it still won't cover my shins. Too poor for a horse, at least I have feet. In the palace, there's camel hoof stew and tangerines. I thought of Wang Xianxue. When thieves broke into his house, he asked them not to take his old green rug. They say immortals eat cloud seed rice, which is shattered up. The music stops. Moonlight shines on the planks of the floor. Send me a letter. There are no men left, but constricting boys. The chubby ones have mothers saying goodbye. The thin ones just look forlorn. Everyone has cousins who died in the war. I remember when we were kids, you were better than me at counting coins. He said, at 15 you're sent to guard the river. At 40 you're sent west to the forts. Those who make it back home have gray hair. The rest are bones in some field. Half the people of Qin are now the wandering ghosts of the unburied. In the abandoned villages, the new ghosts are in torment, and the old ghosts weep for them. He said, to kill a man, I'm taught, first shoot the horse. I watch the clouds, but can't follow them away. An abandoned courtyard, an old tree, a temple bell lying on its side, the world I live in. They win and we lose. We lose and they win. Vines wrap around the rotting bones. She knows he won't come back from the army, but patches the clothes he left just in case. In the street, a woman is weeping. A boy walks by whistling. An officer changes his horse. The clouds are brown and unmoving. The wind picks up. All things do what they do. Birds swoop to catch an insect. Moonlight breaks through the forest leaves. Soldiers guard the border. I am trapped in this body. I lift my face to watch the birds. I turn my head, thinking someone has called me. I wrote 4 poems on a sick cypress, on a sick orange tree, on a withered palm, and a withered bamboo. You ask how I'm doing. Listen to the wild geese echoing and the war horses galloping by. Day breaks, darkness fades, the stars sing out, the snow lays up. Magpies on the towers and crowds of crows take off. The river barely moves along the city walls. It will take me a long time to go home. Here the women sit here the men sit and the women stand. The men stay home and the women climb the mountains collecting firewood. The landscape is beautiful, the weather terrible, and they call their temple taking poison. No news, snow whirls, in the street, the bones of the frozen. A hut with a single window made from the broken rim of a large pot. For 3 months, the beacon fires of the rebels in the mountains. The east wind smells like blood. I remember when ordinary people were merely distressful. Birds keep themselves hidden, but sing. There are cuckoos in West Sichuan, but no cuckoos in East Sichuan. There are cuckoos in Yunnan, but no cuckoos in Fuzhou. They say when a cuckoo cries, it sounds like the words, "You should go home." Friends with good jobs stop writing. The world is damp and dry, damp or dry. 2 swallows suddenly came into my room. They were raised in dust and wind. It took them a long time to get here, escaping the damp and dry of the world like me. A single petal falling means less spring. A kingfisher's nest, a dragonfly's wing. Study closely the patterns of things. The mind is crystal. Rain soaks my clothes. Soldiers still guard the ruined palace. Rats run across the tiles. A squirrel with folded hands outside his broken nest. That dandelion in the wind once I grew. Live like a wren, unnoticed on a high branch, and you'll stay alive. It's been so many years. I imagine her face, looking at me skeptically. The people in these parts are strange. They're unfriendly to old friends and unfriendlier to those they've just met. They raise cormorants at home, and every day they just eat sturgeon. You can't trust them either. The roosters crow long after the sun rises. There's thunder in the cold of winter. I thought of Confucius, who said that if a unicorn is ever actually captured, no one will know what it is. Why do stupidities become customs? I thought of those monkeys who were furious that they were given 3 acorns in the morning and 4 at night. So their keeper gave them 4 in the morning and 3 at night, and they were peaceful again. Parrots are more intelligent than people. They know they're in a cage. Better to go back to sleep.
It gave me a place for my mind to go without turning my mind away from the world. So I really start outside of Dufu for a second. I wanted to ask you, you know, you're a writer, translator, editor, what I call a forger. Can you tell us when poetry first struck you? When you first been struck by poetry?
Oh yeah, that's easy. No, because no, I don't think of it all the time, but there's an actual moment. Because when I was 13 years old, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I wanted to be an archaeologist in Mesoamerica. So I'm reading all these books on the Mayas and the Aztecs, and then stuck inside a sort of a fat book, maybe Prescott, Conquest of Mexico or something, was this little New Directions pamphlet, which was Muriel Rukeyser's translation of Octavio Paz's Sunstone. And I hadn't read any poetry before, but I saw, well, here's a poem that's based on the Aztec calendar, and I know about the Aztec calendar, and also that had something to do with the Spanish Civil War, which is something I was also completely obsessed with at the time. And so I said, well, I guess I'll read this poem. And then I discovered that poetry could be about everything. And that was the moment, you know, so that was my epiphany moment when I decided to become a writer.
And then Spanish poetry, Chinese poetry, did it all kind of come to one lead to the next?
Yeah, I mean, China, well, my interest in China began with this children's book writer, Kurt Wiese, who was a German who came to the United States in the 20s, I think, and wrote and illustrated children's books about China. Most notably, well, two important books for me. One was called The Story About Ping. Ping is a dot on the Yangtze River. And also, Jonathan Spence, the great historian of China, told me that he first got interested in China reading Ping the Dot too. So, very important book. And then the other book that Kurt Wiese did was called You Can Write Chinese. And so it was about the pictographic characters. And so I read this, you know, I'm like 88 or something. And so I read this book and I saw, wow, a man looks just like a man, and a tree looks just like a tree. And this is, you know, long before emojis. So that kind of blew my mind. So that was my interest. It begins there in China, and then of course as a teenager I started reading Ezra Pound, and then Ezra Pound tells you that if you know anything about poetry, you better learn Chinese. And Latin America, that begins. Well, I mean, first I read Paz, and then I was translating. In high school, I was translating poetry as a way to learn how to write poetry, and then I also traveled in South America when I was 16. I was traveling around Peru and Bolivia and Chile, and then when I was 18 or 19, I met somebody who knew Paz. And I said, oh, I translate all these poems here. This guy said, well, I'll send him your policy, but he thinks, and then Paz liked him a lot, and asked if I would translate the book. So I was a hippie dropout, I had nothing to do with it. And so I could tell my parents now I have something to do, I'm translating a book, you know. So that's the origin story and all of that.
When you started thinking about reading Chinese poetry, you would come to Dufu quite quickly. Do you want, for those who may not be familiar with the figure of Dufu, do you want to give sort of brief outline of the slide?
No, why don't you? You're writing a novel. I just did little poems, you know. You're the narrative person. Well, Dufu is, I mean, okay, what can we say? Dufu is universally considered the greatest Chinese poet. He was in the Tang Dynasty in the 8th century. And, I mean, Kenneth Rexwell said he is the world's greatest non-epic, non-dramatic poet. And that's kind of poetry that is about everything in its fashion.
So we talked about that part of him Dufu at the beginning assumes he would live the life of a scholar, an official, that he would pass these very intense civil service examinations, that he would serve the emperor, and he fails at least twice.
Right. Yeah. And nobody knows why he failed, because he did come from a prominent family. He was evidently a smart guy. But somehow he whether it was self-destructive or not, but he failed, and so he could only attain the rank of an incredibly minor official.
Meanwhile, he sees his peers, young men he knows, rising up through the world, moving to positions of great power. And a lot of the earlier Dufu poems that always moves me and that I've always been fascinated by are him looking for a job. They're poems sent as curriculum vitae, as applications.
Right, and sucking up to important people too. Because I mean, there's a whole social aspect of writing poetry in China too. Besides, the great lyric poetry, is that if you have dinner with someone, you write a poem afterwards thanking them, or if they invite you, you write a poem thanking them. And so there's a lot of this kind of social. And so there's 1,600 surviving poems of Dufu, and a lot of them are those kind of social, what should we call them, niceties. And then he is often trying to get a job or get some money.
Almost like all other person's networking emails in verse form. He does end up being summoned to the capital. He does believe that the job that he has aspired to is about to fall into his lap. He has children, he marries, he writes, so he moves through all these social layers. And all the time he's keeping a record, in a sense. And then the rebellion happens. He's 43 by this point, still without an official title or official job. I think at that point he had just gotten a job. Yes, he had just gotten a job in the world, basically felt that. Do you want to talk about that Russian rebellion a bit, just for context? These are where we have the vast majority of Dufu's poems.
Right. Yeah, and so I mean, it's the Tang Dynasty on the one hand is this unbelievably spectacular cultural gathering. Chang'an, the capital city, which is the largest city in the world, as I said, was also an incredibly multicultural city, and it had, because the Tang Empire really went from the sea all the way to Samarkand and all the way south to Annam, which is Vietnam now. And so there were people of, and of course this is along the Silk Route, so you have people of many ethnicities, speaking many languages, many religions. So it is this unusually in China a kind of multicultural moment. And then of course the other big thing that happens in the Tang Dynasty is the serious introduction of Buddhism. And so there's all of this, and then the rich are the ones who are the patrons of Buddhism, actually. And so then they build all of these temples and monasteries and so forth. Then you get to the Empress Wu, who then destroys it all. So it is this sort of amazing moment, incredibly refined, probably most, well, not all of the best Chinese poetry, but a lot of the best Chinese poetry is then. Chinese music, the arts, everything is flourishing amazingly during this moment. It's a very refined culture, but simultaneously there are all these wars going on. And there's wars with the Tibetans, there's wars with the Uyghurs, there's wars with the Mongolians, I think, and the Annamese in the south. And then the dynasty begins to fall apart, and there's this huge rebellion by this guy Han Lushan, which leads to a devastating war where as I said before, a third of the population died. It's kind of unbelievable.
We've got an estimated 70% killed or displaced in one form or another. They just disappear from the census, from the official
Yeah,
records.
70%.
Displaced or killed.
Oh.
Yeah. So when you sat down with Dufu, of course he's been living around you for a long time, right?
In the neighborhood.
In the neighborhood. I understand that you started to spend time with his poems again during the pandemic.
Yeah, I mean, so basically, during the pandemic, I decided to read the complete poetry of Dufu. What else do you do? And
I was doing the exact same thing.
you're reading Dufu, the complete poetry? We
I'd
should
like
have.
to show you volume
We should have been in
5.
touch.
Volume 5 of 17.
And then I decided to, to create this book. And the way the book works is that everything in it comes from the poetry of Dufu. In other words, it's an image, an idea, a sentiment that's in the poetry of Dufu. And then the only thing that's not exactly in the poetry of Dufu is, of course, like all Chinese poets, he makes lots of allusions to things. So where he would basically just name the name and then his readers would know what he's talking about, then I kind of tell the story from that allusion. But basically I don't add anything to it that's not already in Dufu. But they're not translations because they don't mirror any actual poems. They're just foraged, as you would say, from the complete poetry.
It was beautiful for me reading it because I would be reading and certain lines I'd be like, oh, I know that line. And it had been sort of reconstituted in a different way, so you had sort of just reconfigured a life story into a single poem, and then I thought sort of thinking as a single song.
Yeah, and interesting, I mean, there are actually good bits in some of those poems where he's looking for a job and things like that. There'll suddenly be a line that you can extract from that. So these are the poems that nobody bothers to read hardly anymore, but they do have the things in them.
I got the sense that, more than translation, you were transposing time. That you were, okay, so let me back up a bit. I feel like with especially with Dufu, he's known for the rigor of his form. He's a very, compared to, say, Li Bai, who has this, who we think of as the spontaneous, the gestural, who has this immediacy in his life and is always sort of retooling the form. Dufu is spoken of as the more Confucian one, the more traditional one, the more repressed. Would that be a word? I don't feel it. But let's say more like Bach. The Bach of the
Okay.
poets.
Okay.
And with translation with Chinese poetry, so I mean, I feel like as we watch different people translate, as you show in 19 ways of looking at one word, I don't know where I got this term, but I picked it up somewhere that there is something that's a non-boneless style. That there's a rigorous way of translating that keeps to the skeletal frame that holds all the bones in place. And there's another way of translating that is more boneless.
Blobby?
I know, it doesn't translate well, does it? I need a better word for
Wait,
that.
boneless, but who said it was, who said
I was
boneless?
trying to find
In
that.
what language?
It sounds like Chinese, actually.
Yeah, it does sound like Chinese.
But you are, because I feel, I recognize your Dufu. It's like when I hear you read it, when I read these lines, it's like I know this feels to me so much like the Dufu that has accompanied me as well. Even though you have held him in a different kind of stone, And I'm wondering about relationship between translating, reimagining, re-inhabiting, or letting him speak in a new way?
Yeah, I mean, obviously since I'm not translating, I'm not chained to the original text, so I'm kind of, it's really an auto-fiction in poetry, except the auto is Dufu and not me, But then you're creating Dufu as a character in your novel, so is that a completely different Dufu?
Has to be, because when I was doing my notes, I kept thinking, this is Eliot's Dufu, and I was thinking about my Dufu. I was thinking about all of the ways we carry these figures that, in some way, the longer we live with them, the more separate and real they seem, because they're fully themselves, and yet we understand that we are carrying just a facet. So your Dufu, how would you say your Dufu is different from all the other Dufus?
I'm not going to answer that. How is your Dufu different from all the others? How is your Dufu different from my Dufu?
My Dufu speaks to the landscape a lot. He's often on his own wandering. Those early years he's on, there's fewer poems from that time. I spent most of my novel takes place in the parts where we have fewer Dufu poems. Because it gives me more space.
When he's just wandering,
Almost all the way up to the war, and then the war happens very quickly in my yours, I believe, is almost in the most
early on, and then in the exile, and it's kind of like the age of the
Like you found component parts of it. I mean, okay, let me ask it a different way. Like, did you feel like he took root in you, or you took root in him?
That's a hard question, right? But let's talk about, you wrote this article where you said that Chinese poetry can't be translated. Let's have a fight about that.
I quoted a whole bunch of translators who said this could not be translated, or this particular thing could not be translated, or this could not be translated. Well, I was thinking about that too, because last time we met, we had a little bit of a disagreement about this. And I wondered if we could approach it a different way, which is, how would you define translatability?
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, is that okay, there's very specific qualities of Chinese poetry that do not translate, okay? One is, the incredible compression of classical Chinese, and also the whole visual element of it. Some of the characters are pictographic, some of them are pictographic plus sonic, but there is that whole visual aspect that can't be translated. On the other hand, lately I've been thinking that in certain ways Chinese poetry is better in English translation, because
I think this is where we were going to put on the gloves.
right. Because Chinese is notable as a language that probably has the fewest sounds of any major language, and they make up for it by having the 4 tones in Mandarin. And sonically, it's a very boring language. It's not a musical language in that same way, and which is why all the classical poems were always set to music, and they were always taking songs and they were applying them to songs. But then when you translate Chinese into English, you can create, there's a very rich kind of sonic quality that begins with Pound's Cafe and carries through to Rexroth and now David Ingram. So that the music of Chinese poetry is actually I think more interesting in English than it is in Chinese.
I think that that's a question of how we love our mother's face. That their mother's
No, don't get into that.
No, really. If it's your mother tongue,
Yeah.
you hear it, and it tells you emotion. The different, the only thing I hear is the sound of your mother's voice, is the sound of the poems and the sounds you hear talking.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, these poems of the Tang poets, all of these lines are so much part of the Chinese language. They're also,
Right.
fragmented and distributed throughout the language in their own contemporary speech. So I think that's a question of the idea that there may be more beautiful in montage because English is your language.
Yeah, well, okay, but there's the associative aspect of it, all right, that's, obviously that's true, but then, but in just the pure sound of the poems themselves, no?
I don't think so.
My thought.
I mean, when I think of, I am not fluent, and I can understand Cantonese, and my father speaks a different dialect, Hakka. But the friends that I have who know poetry, who can speak it, who can sing it, I would have to disagree because of the way that sense of emotion exists in the China parodies and in the rise and fall that is both inbuilt and has to be personally expressed. So I do disagree, but I do think, something you say in the Long Way book is how these translations, these many translations of the Long Way poem are like relations to one another. They spring from the beginning, they become daughters and sons of the original poem.
Right. So
And I agree with that.
Yeah, oh, okay, good. And of course, we don't really know totally what the Tang poetry sounded like in the Tang Dynasty.
Correct.
So I mean, modern Chinese reading Dufu is a completely different sound.
I did want to ask you one thing though about this idea of continuity, because when I read the way you return Dufu to us in this form, I had this sense, which I really liked, and maybe it comes to untranslatability, is your generosity with the idea of what an original is, what the original poem was, and in a sense that original poem remains unfinished as long as we keep retranslating it, rethinking it, respeaking it in different languages. Is that a sense that, is that more a level of untranslatability?
Yeah, I mean, I've always believed that poetry is that which needs to be translated, and that the poem has to go through all of these different readers and all of these different translations to mean a lot. I mean, the untranslated poem is a poem that dies in that sense. I mean, it's also true of the figure of Dufu. I mean, we've now had many different Dufus in the beginning of the 20th century and earlier. So Dufu just keeps going as he should, as all great writers do.
Part of the foraging act is a way that we allow ourselves, as novelists, to, as the many ways you've held literatures, that we're just allowing ourselves to be vessels for these ideas that we really want to be available in the future. Is that some part of it?
To be available in the future.
Yes, I sometimes
You think about the
just
future, really?
I don't know. Should I not?
I don't know. I've never thought about the future.
Who's the
I mean, in terms of writing.
Like when you put this together, was the imagined reader?
No, I have no imagination. I never had. I mean, no, I mean, because I think, I do three kinds of things. In terms of essay writing, there's political things, and so then that's, directed towards a certain kind of audience. There's commission things like a review or an introduction, and then also you have to think about who's going to publish it, they have requirements, blah, blah, blah. And then there's the literary essays, and I just write those for myself. I never thought I would do it. Just kind of do it to amuse myself. You know?
There are parts of me that don't entirely believe you.
No, how can I don't know how you prove that one way or the other, but no, but I've never thought about readers in that sense. I think if you're writing literature and you start thinking about readers, you just, I don't know what you do. I mean,
Think about a companion. I sometimes need I need someone to accompany me. Maybe that's another part of myself, you know.
Right.
But I need the sense of a third. Yeah.
No, I don't, and nobody reads my finished manuscript. I mean, nobody reads my manuscript until it gets sent to this other publisher.
Yes.
And even then, they don't read it. Except for new directions.
I feel very lucky that I've got to, like, you know, poke at you for the last 40 minutes, but I would love to open it up to questions because there's a broad amount of things we haven't discussed. So, if anyone has questions, hi.
I just had a point to answer in response to Chinese poetry being sonically boring. I think that in particularly with Tang poetry, you can't use the framework of Beijing pronunciation of
Right,
four
of
tones.
course.
It's
Yeah.
actually closer to southern Chinese dialects like Cantonese and Hokkien. And if you read it in the way that they would have spoken Chinese in that period, it would sound very different.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. But it does. I mean, Chinese has so many qualities that other languages do not have. But on the other hand, in terms of sounds, it really has far fewer. I mean, and I think that's one of the main reasons why classical Chinese poetry was always sung. Whereas the other poetry is not sung. I mean, the poetry, classical poetry everywhere else in the world is not necessarily sung.
I think that the southern dialects of Cantonese have 13 background tones.
You have many more
Cantonese
tones.
has 9.
They sound very different.
Yeah. I think I'm going to be in trouble for this for a long time.
No, we were joking.
But it is interesting that that Chinese poetry has been enormously influential on American poetry in the 20th century, and it has not in any other language. I mean, French or German, Italian have not. Basically, only the scholars translated it, and in American poetry, beginning with Pound, of course, and Café. Café is the first book of modern poetry in English, and it's a translation from the Chinese. And so it's been enormously influential, and poetry, and basically, I mean, for most of the 20th century, almost all the poets across the spectrum, from the most traditional to the most avant-gardist, all wrote Chinese poetry. Which hasn't happened in any, it hasn't happened in any other language before.
I was just wondering if there's any kind of oblique political commentary in this set of poems, because I think a lot of your writing, when you revisit the past, it's commentary on contemporary politics in some way. Or if there were aspects of the present that floated into your mind while you were reading Dufu.
Yeah, well, certainly the war. I mean, it's I don't know if it's political commentary, but
Speak into the
I'm
mic.
sorry, I don't know if it's political commentary, but certainly the devastation of the war. In fact, it's probably more real since the book came out than
Sorry, if you don't mind, I also wanted to ask about why it's in poetry form this time, not in essay.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess I write some essays that look like poems, and this one just came out as a poem. Since I'm dealing with poetry, I think it for what I was trying to do and the sort of fragmentation. I think it just works better as poetry, or I guess it's prose poetry, since some of it's paragraphs.
Do you have a question? Or do you just want to
What?
speak about it?
Question, yeah? Okay.
Yeah, technical question. When you have to make a word choice going from Chinese to English, do you have any particular references or sounding boards? How do you resolve an issue of going with one word as opposed to another? Say, basing it on Chinese etymology versus current use versus, how do you resolve that struggle when you're trying to find a choice between one English word and another?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not translating Chinese, so I'm kind of, I'm not really translating a line of Chinese. I'm kind of reimagining it in that sense. But the only actual translations I've done are of the poetry of Beidao, and it's interesting because it has, there's a lot of problems translating even contemporary Chinese because, for example, Chinese makes no distinction between the singular and the plural. And so I would be translating these poems with Beidao, and I'd say, well, is that one trumpet or trumpets? And he would say, well, I never thought of it. So you have to make those kinds of, decisions when which is not in the poetry. And then classical poetry is incredibly condensed. So you're constantly coming up with ways to get around that, because in English you have to put in things that are connecting those words in a way that you don't in classical Chinese.
Why do you think there is that kind of unique resonance between Chinese and American writing? Like you're saying that, in French and German and other languages there wasn't the same kind of artistic grasp.
Well, I think it's because first of all, it started out with the poets translating, and it started with Ezra Pound, and then Arthur Waley after Ezra Pound. And Waley, I mean, there's kind of three categories of Chinese translators. One is poets who don't know any Chinese. Then there's poets who know a little Chinese. I guess there's four categories. Poets who know a little Chinese. Then you have the sinologists who don't know anything about contemporary poetry in English. And then you have the sinologists who know a lot about contemporary poetry in English. And so, it makes a big difference. And I'd say most of the other languages, the translations were done by sinologists who were not really interested in the contemporary poetry of their language. So it was much more of an academic exercise. In English, we had this, first you have Pound, who knew some Chinese. Then you have Arthur Waley, who was a distinguished sinologist, but also totally tuned into the poetry of this moment. Then in the 50s, you have Kenneth Rexroth, who knew some Chinese, a major poet, and then Burton Watson, maybe the greatest translator, who was also totally plugged into all of the poetry of that moment. I was good friends with Gary Snyder. Gary Snyder, another translator of Chinese. And now David Hinton, who I think is probably the best sinologist translator, is also somebody who knows contemporary American poetry very well. But the problem with translation is always that it comes from one place and it goes to another. And the academic translators know everything about where it's coming from, but they don't know anything about where it's going to. And so Chinese has been very fortunate in being translated into the context of the contemporary poetry in English from the beginning of the 20th century. And then, I mean, there's so much that's so appealing about Chinese poetry. I mean, it's first of all a very condensed language, which was appealing to what was happening in American poetry, its imagism, getting rid of 19th century rhetoric and so forth. There's the sort of precise observation of nature. There's a kind of humanness about it, which I think was extremely appealing, and also a humanness set against, for many poets, set against a larger political reality. There's a lot going on in Chinese poetry that I think was very appealing. I mean, Ezra Pound's Cafe, which came out in the middle of World War I, was very popular among soldiers because there were all these poems about exile and being separated from their loved ones. And so the soldiers in the trenches were reading this Chinese poetry and that had been written 1,000 years before and feeling that this poetry was very close to them.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Question over there.
Oh, one more.
What?
I was just curious, could you talk a little bit about your writing process for this book?
In what sense?
How did you write it? I mean, how much?
One word at a time. No, I mean, as I said, I read all 1,600 poems of Dufu, and then I just kind of selected things out of it, and then I, arranged them and rewrote them. I mean, since, it wasn't cut and paste in that sense because I'm writing all the words in English, and so then I just kind of put it together. I'm not sure about.
I was wondering too about like, what would an average day look like for you? Like, would you watch the news? Would you spend time like going for walks? Like, how much were you trying to maybe imitate what you were reading?
Oh no, because I have a life.
Or like, experiments for yourself, or.
No, I wasn't experimenting on myself. Especially in the Tang Dynasty, they were obsessed with immortality. They used to come up with all these concoctions, cinnabar and all these things to take for immortality. And I believe, you can correct me, I believe that 6 of the emperors died from being poisoned by longevity drugs.
Cold
So
food
I didn't
powder.
take any drugs.
But there are quite a lot of poems by Dufu about the herbs that he's growing and the particular vegetables he's foraging, and a lot of poems about what he's eating or not eating.
Right.
Yes.
And then he's always failing at the. I think I can't remember if I have that in this or not. Where it's like says like anybody can grow lettuce, so how come mine is so bad?
And then there's a series of letters where he writes to people asking them for seeds and
Oh, right.
trees. I love those.
Yeah.
He's like, wow, your whatever tree was so amazing. Wouldn't that look so good in the garden of a scholar? One thing I was just going to add about, maybe this wellspring of that Chinese poetry became for American poets is also because, I mean, there's centuries of these Chinese poets who were, because of these civil service examinations, have memorized thousands upon thousands of poems. So the way in which they were drinking and the way in which they were in conversation with each other and continuously alluding to each other is so rich and complex to the point where, in the certain famous landscape spots, they would write their poems on the same rock, and you can see them across centuries, different famous poets adding their poems to the land itself. I think it must have nourished something in the spirit here.
Yeah, I mean, to become a Chinese official, you had to memorize thousands of poems, I mean, which is, you know, is there a member of Congress who could recite a single poem?
And yet it didn't save them from catastrophe.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah, I mean, there used to be this belief that if everybody read poetry, there'd be no more war, but I mean, it's not true in China. What can I say?
I think we have time for maybe one more if there is one.
I have two questions about poetry. I was wondering if you have very diverse topics and different areas and types of poetry, and yet if anything that you would think that would unite all of your different works of poetry and essays and prose, if you would choose some kind of something that in a way connects all of these different works of yours, what would that be?
Yeah, I'm a dilettante. No, I mean, Charles Fourier in the 18th century created the utopian communities. He had, all of these different types of humans, and one of which was the butterfly, and the butterfly just goes from flower to flower, and then you have the other kinds who are just like obsessive on one thing, and then they spend their life on one thing. So I would say it's kind of the butterfly. It's, I just kind of go from topic to topic.
You're like a butterfly who's carrying like a huge card catalog.
And dreaming that I'm Zhuangzi, right?
It was interesting that you mentioned that before you were struck with poetry, you were considering, you were interested in archaeology, and I found it, this is something that probably I would choose as something that unites all these, the different subjects, because I
Yeah, I
think
like
you
to
have
dig up things.
yeah, have kind of an archaeological approach, even to poetry translation, because at the end of the day, I think even the original poem is also a translation in some way, because it's a translation from just like some other invisible imprint of sorts, or an experience, or previous experience with other poets' poems, even if it's not called translation. So in a way, it's some sort of an archaeology of a different myths and
Yeah, you're dusting off the artifacts.
yeah.
Thank you so much, Eliot. It's such a
Well, thank you all for coming.